it was so, so critical. And this is what I say all the time, that God will take the least equipped people. And if you are brave enough to say yes to what he's calling you to, and it takes it does take a lot of bravery. Like, first of all, maybe as women in general, but certainly as young women and me as a young mom, you don't think that you're kind of looking at God like, who, me? Like, you want me to do what?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Woman of Faith in Leadership. I am excited to have you here on the 20th of January 2025, or whenever it is that you are listening to this episode. Let's get into another episode. So, in today's episode, I've got a guest, Lisa Stephen, and Lisa began working with Teen MOPS in 1997 through the Teen MOPS program. And in 2003, she co-founded Hope House Colorado and has served as the founder and executive director ever since. Lisa is also the co-founder of the Colorado Teen Parent Collaborative, and she's a former teen mom. And Lisa is committed to empowering teen moms in her community and across the world. Now, I had a very insightful conversation with Lisa today about leadership in her space and how someone like her, who had no formal training and no experience, came out at the top as a leader, and what that has taught her in terms of leadership skills and in terms of that nonprofit space, because she's in the nonprofit space. So I really look forward to you listening into this conversation, and I hope that it's going to be insightful for those of you, especially who have no formal training or experience. And whether you have that or not, you'll see the importance of having a mentor, something that I've spoken about in the past as well, and how on-the-job learning can be so crucial. So if you're in a leadership position, which you are because you're listening to the show, don't underestimate the value of on-the-job learning. Okay, so I look forward to sharing this episode with you. Let's get into it. Do you wish that you could lead your team in a way that honors and glorifies God? Are you struggling to overcome self-doubt as a leader and have a desire to be more confident in your role? Welcome to the Woman of Faith in Leadership podcast. I'm Rika, and for the last decade, I've experienced my fair share of managing challenging employees and teams in middle management leadership roles. I committed my leadership journey to God, and it changed everything. And I'm ready to share everything I've learned with you. Now, if you're ready to lead your team in a way that honors God, grab that notebook and pen, and don't forget your chai latte, and let's dive in. Now, before we get into the episode, I'd like to personally invite you to come and join a community of Christian leaders that are all seeking to glorify God in their leadership roles. Women like you who are also dealing with difficult people, who might be in their very first leadership role, and who are seeking others to connect with. Come over and let's discuss things like team dynamics, Christian leadership, and many more topics relating to leadership. Once a fortnight, I'll also be going live in the Facebook group and providing a short training that I won't be featuring on the podcast, so you definitely don't want to miss out. You definitely want to be a Woman of Faith in Leadership insider. Now, when you join the community, you'll also be providing me with your email address, and by doing so, you actually become an insider where you'll also be receiving my newsletter. So once a week, I pop a newsletter in your inbox and I share something personal from my own life and how that has been relevant to me in my leadership journey, because all of you have personal stories, personal journeys. And I think if we start looking at those journeys and those stories, we can really relate them to our own leadership roles and figure out, why are we this person? Why did we become this type of leader that we are? And why we're striving to be better, because our personal stories make us who we are. So by sharing my personal stories, I hope that you will dig deeper into your own personal stories as well. So come and join a community of amazing Christian leaders, female Christian leaders, and let's pray together and let's band together and let's be there for each other. I look forward to seeing you in the community. Just navigate to womanoffaithinleadership.com, where you'll be able to click the button to go into the community. It'll take you straight there. Or go to Facebook and search for Women of Faith in Leadership Community. I'll see you there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to bring another guest to the podcast today. And today on the show, I have Lisa Stephen. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be with you and your listeners.
Perfect. Now, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? Where did you come from, and what's your experience with leadership?
Oh, thank you. So that's a lot. I am a former teen mom. My husband and I got pregnant when we were 17 and got married. All of my wedding pictures, I'm smiling with my lips closed because I didn't want people to see my braces because I thought somehow I looked older if you couldn't see my braces. So that was silly because it was the 80s and he had a mullet and we just looked young no matter what we tried. So I come from have lived in Colorado, the state of Colorado in the United States forever and my whole life, and grew up in a home that was pretty chaotic. My dad struggled with alcohol and kind of worked sometimes, but didn't work a lot of the time. And he and my mom had pretty significant fights and just some domestic violence in our home that I kind of grew up feeling like I was sort of the adult in the household as the oldest child and took care of the three younger children. Oftentimes, at least in my view, that's how it felt as the oldest child, having to kind of care for them and shepherd them. And I bring that up only because it's a really common experience for the teen moms that I work with today, to feel like they're sort of the adult in the household. So I relate to them in a lot of ways besides being a teen mom. And then became a mom when I was really young and had our little boy who is now 38 years old and has three kids of his own. So I'm a very former teen mom, especially to the teenage moms I work with today. They're like, yeah, what? You were a teen mom in like 1986? That's a really long time ago. And have had the opportunity over the years to have some kind of early experiences with leadership through MOPS International, and I know MOPS is now called the Mom Co, and also has like a office or a national Australian office for MOPS and the Mom Co. They basically provide back in the day when I joined MOPS, they provided support group settings for mothers to get together and not support because just support in terms of moms being with other moms of small children and having a chance to finish a sentence, having a chance to know you're not the only mom who yells more than you wish you did. And gosh, what can we do about that together to help us not do that so much? So it was a place to build community. And I joined my first MOPS group as a very young mother, very worried that when I would walk through the door, I would get judged, because as a teenage mom, you pretty much face judgment everywhere you go. And literally, you walk into the grocery store and people are looking at you like, is that your kid or are you their sister or what? And that's sort of the like nicer version of judgment. So I really didn't want to go to a group where all of the women were doing it right in quotation marks, like they had gotten married first and had their children at the right age. And I pretty much only went because my mother-in-law, who I adored, had been a part of the first ever MOPS group that started in Colorado. And so she really was like, you got to go to MOPS. It's where I found Jesus. Like you've got to go experience it. And so I wanted to please her. So I went, and it just turned out to be nothing like I thought it would be. It was, they were so warm and so welcoming and created a place of belonging that, still today with Hope House Colorado, we have tried to emulate that ability to create a sense of belonging and warmth and welcome for the teenage moms we serve today. And that was where I had my first very early chance to lead. They let me, and I say let me because I was like, dude, did you check how old I was before you asked me this? But they let me be the co-leader of the Mopettes, which was the children's group. And I couldn't believe they let me lead. I'd never been in a meeting. I'd never seen an agenda. I didn't have a clue what leadership meant or looked like. And so it was a little bit life-changing that they gave me that opportunity.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And it's a shame the listeners can't see our expressions because I was like oohing and eyeing all the way through. It sounds so amazing, your experience. And it's just amazing how God really had a plan. And,
Mhm.
sometimes we are so frustrated by the things that happen in our life. And, something like a teen pregnancy can go really sour very quickly. It can be very negative experience as well. So I was curious, when you were talking, you mentioned that your mother-in-law, so you guys were not married just then when you were younger, but it seemed that your family was really on board with what had happened. And yes, I'm just a little bit curious about that part. And I thought we, can give the listeners more of a sense of kind of like what happened in that stage. And then when you stepped into that leadership role, what happened for you there was because you mentioned that that was life changing. Did you just get a passion for leadership in that? And then tell us a little bit more about Hope House, Colorado.
Sure, thank you. So, let's see, what the first part of what you asked me
Yeah, so
was,
just your experience with your family and with
oh,
your
yes.
husband's family. Yeah.
Thank you. So, telling my family that I was pregnant was probably easier than telling his parents because my family was, by that point, my parents were divorced. They were quite in disarray. And so it was, and I wasn't necessarily looking for approval or disapproval or any of those things from my parents. With my husband's family, I joke with him sometimes, I married you for your family, just so you know. Like they were the family I wanted. They were parents who ate dinner together at the table and talked to their children and asked about their day and created structure and boundaries and all of the things that kids need. And they had their own hardships. My mother-in-law had contracted a kidney disease when she was pregnant with her fourth child and was on dialysis. And so had health issues during my husband's growing up years. So they definitely had their challenges, but I saw them fight through those and work through those challenges together. And his father cared for his mother and they were so respectful to each other and didn't yell at each other across the dinner table. And so I really didn't want to disappoint them. And and I know my husband didn't either. And we, for whatever reason, as a 17-year-old young man, my husband thought, or soon to be husband, thought it was a great idea to tell his parents that we were pregnant while she was on dialysis, which she did at home. So they would do it in the basement and they were watching a movie and dad was in one chair and mom's in the other chair doing dialysis. And if you've never seen dialysis, I mean, literally the person's blood is going through a machine and kind of cycling through and it cleans their blood. And I'm like, we're gonna kill her. Like, this is a really bad idea. So we just stood there silently for probably at least a half hour. And I'm like, they know something's going on. Like, he just won't even say anything. And finally, he just pokes his thumb at me and he's like, she's pregnant. And I'm like, okay, well, that did take two, but and I laugh about it now, but honestly, I'm quite sure his parents were disappointed. I'm sure that there was a lot of sadness and grief that came later for them that they had privately, but the way they handled it was, all right, well, we need to talk about what marriage looks like and when you're going to get married. And it wasn't said in a judgmental way like, oh, now you've done it, you have to get married. It was, let's talk about how marriage works. Let's talk about, what it looks like to be married and how you're going to move forward. So they handled that moment in my mind brilliantly as parents. I'm sure they had private moments that were much, much tougher. But they showed us love and they showed us guidance and they showed concern and they essentially said, A, you're going to do this. You're going to provide a home for this little one. But B, you can do it. And here's how, here's what it looks like. And they proceeded to give us an example of how to be married, all of these years. My mother-in-law is still one of my people I look up most to in the world. So telling them was difficult, but they handled it very well. Becoming a teen mom, being a teen mom, so I don't know how much time we'll have to get into it, but so there's a difference between situational poverty and generational poverty. So I grew up in a middle class home that suffered from situational poverty because my dad drank and didn't have a job, and so we would be on government benefits when he wasn't working. But as a middle class family, in general, the middle class has their value system sort of operates around you get an education, you go to college, you save money, you have a career, not just a job, and you look for retirement, when you're older. And those are not part of the value system of generational poverty. So when I began working with, so kind of fast forwarding from MOPS to working with teenage moms through, at that time in 1996, MOPS International had introduced Teen MOPS, which was basically working with teenage moms. And I wanted to volunteer with, I was at the point where my kids were in school. I was going to volunteer to work with Teen MOPS because I had a heart for teenage moms, having been one. And my goal, still my plan, God always has, he laughs at me a lot. My plan was to go to college once my kiddos were in school and, follow that middle class pathway and have a career and all those things. And his plan was different. I thought I was just going to volunteer in this Teen MOPS group. And instead I fell in love. And I also was just completely shocked and saddened by the situations that these mamas were facing then and now. We work with moms who are trying to break the cycle of generational poverty. So that means that in their homes, it's a norm to have experienced domestic violence, to have experienced like generations of trauma or generational curses, where generations of nobody's married. There aren't healthy structures in the family. There's a lot of addiction. Oftentimes there is prison time involved. Many times there's not a dad involved or a stepfather who is abusive, sexual abuse, physical abuse, sort of all of the traumas that you can think of exist inside of generational poverty. And so in this Teen MOPS group, we had a beautiful young woman who was a mother to twins and was living with a much older guy, which was not super uncommon and still is not. And she became a believer through our MOPS group. We did a Bible study on the side, and she accepted Jesus into her life, and she made the decision that she wanted to ask this man to leave. And so she asked him to leave her home, her apartment she lived in, and he did. And then a couple of months later, she hurt her back and couldn't care for the kids by herself. And she asked him to move back in and help with the kids for a little while. And then when she wanted him to leave again, that did not go well. He beat her up and he ended up killing her, and then took his own life. And that was so traumatic, one, because she should have had a place to go. And I should be clear that Hope House is not a domestic violence shelter, and I'll talk a little bit about what we do. But there was nowhere for this young woman, Tracy, to go. And I tell her story in my book, A Place to Belong. There was nowhere for Tracy to go because she was a teenage mom who was already parenting. And in the United States, at least then, and kind of now too, there were no homes for parenting teenage moms. There were maternity homes where you could go if you were pregnant and trying to make a birth decision, and you could usually stay 3 to 6 months after the birth of the baby. But if you already had children and you were 16 or 17 years old, oftentimes even up to 21 years old, there was nowhere for you to go. And so to this day, we are still the only residential home for parenting teenage moms in the state of Colorado. And before Tracy was killed, we had begun these conversations through our Teen MOPS group about, well, there's nowhere for our moms to go. They have these really rough stories and no one's doing anything about it. And it was kind of like God was looking at us going, well, I'm kind of asking you to do something about it. And Tracy, or as we, were talking about this with our teen moms at this MOPS group, Tracy was the first one to write a check. She wrote a check for $15. She had just started a home-based business selling candles, and she had written us a check. And on the bottom of the check, it said, "May all our dreams come true." And I keep that check to this day in my office, framed, a copy of it, because she was so invested. And it was what ended up, as a side note, being a really beautiful thing is that we had done a video to share our vision to open a home for teen moms, and we'd asked our moms in our MOPS group to be a part of it. So we had video of her playing with her children and a lot of pictures of her playing with them that we were able to give to her sister, who ended up adopting her kiddos. And her name's been changed in my book because I don't have contact anymore with that family. So I didn't want to share anything I shouldn't, but she was just a beautiful young woman. And so many of the moms in that group, I'll tell you, teenage moms are so full of grit and determination and resilience and problem solving. Like, they just want to make a better life for their child. but they've literally never seen anybody do it. They've never seen married people be married. They haven't grown up in homes where there are boundaries and structure, and they haven't seen parenting done well. They don't know that if you read to your child before bed, that they'll do better in school. And so they, when they learn these things, they're like, oh, well, how do I get books? And so this is, one of the differences in generational poverty. They haven't been inside of a library. They haven't been inside of a bank. They haven't navigated what we call kind of all of our institutions in America are really built on middle class values. And so you don't see the parents of children in poverty coming to parent teacher conferences. And one of the kind of startling statistics I always share is that a middle class 3-year-old has a larger working vocabulary than a poverty class adult. So if you can imagine a poverty class adult mom, and maybe she's an 18-year-old mom, has a working vocabulary of 900 words, she's totally intimidated to go to a parent teacher conference or to walk into a library, to walk into a bank, anywhere. She doesn't understand half of the words that are being said to her. And she worries that if I don't understand, you'll take my child. So they feel such a lack of agency, such a lack of ability to know that they're not going to land. If I admit that I think maybe my child's behind in speech, but I'm not going to look for a speech therapist, because that's like raising my hand and saying, I'm an 18-year-old mom who doesn't know how to do this and shouldn't be allowed to parent. So that really was kind of the beginning of Hope House, was that realization that someone needed to create a safe place for these mamas to live. So what Hope House Colorado does, our mission is to empower parenting teenage moms to become self-sufficient. We were founded 22 years ago, almost 23 years ago now, and started out as a small residential home with room for 6 moms and their little ones. And today we serve 265 teenage moms and their children on a campus in Arvada, Colorado. We have a large resource center that's maybe a little similar to a school, but we really want it to look like a home. So it's got a large dining room, classroom space for all of the work we do around education. So GED, high school diploma, college and career support, financial literacy, and legal advocacy. And then we do a lot of work on what we call the personal side of self-sufficiency. So counseling and therapy, support groups, personal growth opportunities, lots of opportunities to grow in their faith, and a lot of activities designed to help them to connect with one another and build relationship, which is how we believe change happens, is through relationship with healthy adults. And then we have a housing support program. So outside of we still have that residential home, which has a complete and total miracle story attached to it, which is really why I wrote the book, so I could tell the miracle stories of how that house came to be for our girls. But we also serve about 160 teenage moms through our housing support program, not housing here on our campus, but through partners that we provide partnership to get them into housing, help them understand a lease, help them understand eviction and why you don't want to be evicted, even up to home ownership. We serve our moms until they turn 25. So some of the older moms are looking at wanting to purchase a home as they get older. And then our third primary program is our early childhood education program for the children of our teen moms. We just opened a child care center, a licensed child care center 6 weeks ago on our campus for up to 100 of our children, of our teenage moms, so that the mamas can go to school and work full time, because that child care is a huge barrier.
Wow, wow, wow. That's all I can say. I'm super blown away. And wow, God's hand was all over this from the start. So
yes,
yeah, I'm absolutely blown away by what has happened over the last 23 years for you and for Hope House Colorado and all the things, your resource center, the childcare. I mean, that is just, you've opened up, with your partners, you've opened up doors for these teenage moms to have a life, beyond what they know. So that's amazing. So I wrote a question down when you were talking earlier about the way that your mother-in-law, was dealing with you and then your husband now, the way that she was saying, and yes, there were things going on in the background. You mentioned that she might have had emotions, but she handled it so well with you guys saying that, okay, this is what marriage looks like. This is what we're going to do. And you really were at the receiving end of something really positive and good. And so immediately what came to my mind was was really good leadership from her end. And the fact that she was kind of coaching and mentoring you guys through that whole process. And so, the question that I have, or if it's actually more of a statement or a question, I'm not sure. But if our employees make mistakes, the way that we deal with them is going to be so crucial, because we can either show them the disappointment and what you did was really bad now, and it's going to have these bad consequences. And yes, there should be accountability, but maybe speak a little bit into that leadership part of employees making mistakes and how we should be dealing with them if they're making mistakes. Because I think it's a really crucial point, your experience that you had on the receiving end of that versus being on the receiving end of somebody who shouted at you and who were really cross with you for making that mistake.
Oh my goodness. So aside from the beautiful miracles that I got to write about in my book, A Place to Belong, there are so many leadership lessons along the way. So God called me to something that I was completely not equipped for. I literally had a background of having done home daycare, like caring for children in my home, and working at J.C. Penney's. I still to this day don't know how to type. I've still to this day never gone to college. I had never obviously had an employee, or been a manager. I had worked as a teenager before being married at McDonald's and had plenty of, people who yelled at me there. And I knew I didn't, yelling was not a way I wanted to work with employees. But I learned a lot of things the hard way. And very sadly, as you learn to be a leader and kind of grow up as a leader, there are going to be, you leave some things in your wake. There are definitely employees who I maybe learned really important leadership lessons, but unfortunately they maybe took the brunt of kind of like being a mom, learning that yelling at my kids was not the best way to engage them or get the behavior from them that I wanted. I don't think I ever yelled at an employee, but certainly there were times where they saw me frustrated to a level of like, I literally despised having to do time cards. Like, I am so bad at math. And back in the day, we didn't have systems for payroll. You like added up all the time for the time cards. And I didn't run the payroll. We had a bookkeeper that we paid just a little bit of money, to do that for us. And we started out with, I had a co-founder, and the two of us started out with 3 employees. And those were the employees that would come in to spend the night with the moms overnight in the residential home, or stayed with them on the weekend. And as we kind of grew, we added a part-time parenting educator for like 10 hours a week, and then a part-time volunteer coordinator for another 10 hours a week. And today we have 52 employees. But boy, in those days, like, they would see me get so frustrated. Everybody knew to go hide when I was doing time cards, because I was so bad I would just snap at people, and I was so frustrated while I was doing them. And then I would have to go and apologize that I was so frustrated. So as I said, unfortunately, I kind of learned, my employees they took the brunt of me learning the hard way that is not the way your employees want to feel. They don't want to feel that they have to walk on eggshells around you when you're doing a task you don't like. And that was how I felt growing up in my home. Like, I was walking on eggshells all the time for waiting for some explosion. And so it was so, so critical. And this is what I say all the time, that God will take the least equipped people, and if you are brave enough to say yes to what he's calling you to, and it takes it does take a lot of bravery. Like, first of all, maybe as women in general, but certainly as young women, and me as a young mom, you don't think that you're kind of looking at God like, who, me? Like, you want me to do what? I mean, I'm just a hairdresser, or I'm just a grocery store clerk, or maybe I'm that like high-powered career woman, and you're asking me to give up a high-powered career to go do this, like, where I'm going to not make nearly as much money for my family. We oftentimes are like, who, me, God? And I promise you, if you are hearing that little voice, or he's just knocking on your heart and something won't let go of you, but you just think how could I do that? Who am I to even think about doing that? He will literally surround you with the most amazing people to equip you and help you to complete the call that he's called you to. And so I was very blessed, and you have to be open to it. You can't just be, arrogant, like I don't need help or want help. But boy, I learned so much from board members who were managers of people, from business owners who had built businesses, from volunteers we one time had an older woman who was a volunteer, and I, in my own arrogance, was like, well, I don't even know what she did before she was retired, but she's a grandma. She can help with like watching the kids. She turned out to be a retired insurance executive who, once we figured out what she could do, she completely took over doing our insurance for us at that point in time and righted some things that needed righting because, like, correcting, because I didn't know I was doing them wrong. And so I learned so much about being humble and just being open to who God is bringing into your life, and knowing that you don't have to know it all. You don't have to know how to do insurance. You don't have to know how to do the books. You do have to learn how to manage and lead people for sure. But if you're open to the people God sends around you to do those things, it just creates such a beautiful community and invites other people to be a part of the journey.
That's that's very profound, because I was thinking before, when I read through your bio and through everything, one thing that came up was that, God really chooses unlikely people to lead. And that's one thing that a lot of the listeners have said to me, through my Facebook group or through some of the questions that have come through, is that a lot of them feel really unqualified to do that leadership role that they've been called to do. Or some of them have been looking to do that leadership for a position for a very long time, but as soon as they're in that position, they feel, again, really unqualified and like, who am I to be in this position? And the other thing is, as leaders, that we face are challenging times, because I think it's when those challenging times come, that's in particular when you feel really unqualified, because you're like, oh, okay, I don't have the qualification, or I don't have the experience to deal with this. So, what challenging times have you faced? And I know there's been a lot, and we've already talked about some of them. But what would you say to those leaders who are facing really challenging times? What to do, where to go? Is prayer the only answer, or is there something else that they can do?
Well, prayer is definitely a good place to start. And definitely, I think, just carving out that time for quiet time to read the Bible and to be with God. Really making the time to make sure that you're in a Bible study, so you're learning the Word and studying the Word. Because when those hard times come, that's really where, I feel like, anyway, God has given me so many answers in those times through being in a church service. And like an example I have of when we went through the Great Recession in the United States in 2008 and 2009, it was a really terrible time. People lost their entire retirements. The homelessness rate went up. People were losing their jobs right and left. We were just at the point of kind of growing out of our residential home. So at that point, we were officing out of what used to be the garage of the home, and at that point had grown to offering a mentoring program and a GED program, utilizing the church next door to us. So we had grown, and we were just looking at, gosh, we probably need to figure out office space or another place to move the work that we're doing that isn't the residential programming. And so we had this budget built. We had to cut $250,000 out of our budget in about a month and a half in order to stay open. And we unfortunately had to make really hard decisions to lay off. We only had to let 2 people go, but all of our staff, we asked that remained if they would be willing to take a 10% cut in pay. It actually took a really long time, a number of years, to come back from that, asking people to take a pay cut, and then having to get them back up slowly over time. And what it meant for my co-founder and I was that we oftentimes just weren't taking a check. So we were blessed that we had a husband at home that could help with that, but it caused hardship at home as well. A couple of major things I learned out of that, one of my wise advisors said to me, you need to reach out to your champions and ask them, and we call our donors champions because they're champions of the cause. You need to reach out to your champions and ask them what's going on in their life and tell them what's going on here so that they feel a part of this. And it was amazing to talk to those champions, because one of my questions was, if we end up having to close down something, either the mentoring program or the parenting program or the residential program, what should that be? And I got so much feedback from our champions that please don't close the residential program. That's one of the main reasons I give to you, because I know even if it's a small number of girls, it's a number of girls who have a safe place to live. And also, I got to hear their stories of loss and having to close down a business and having to lay off employees. And I learned from them how they were walking through that. But the other really big thing that happened at that time was that we had two young moms, they were sisters, who had applied for our mentoring program. And we had, just cut staff, and our mentoring program coordinator got a call from them very early in the morning one morning that they had been sleeping in a park. They'd gotten kicked out of their home. They'd been sleeping in a park. One of them had her baby with her, so a 9-month-old baby overnight, and the other one's baby was with the father's family. And she went and picked him up from the park and brought him to Hope House, which was completely breaking all the rules, because there's like a whole process that you're supposed to go through. But what were we supposed to do? So she brought them to Hope House. We got them fed, got everybody warm, put them to bed so they could just rest, and then had a big, powwow about what could we do. We did not have enough staffing because we'd had to make layoffs and cut hours to take in both of those mamas. So we had to pick one of the moms, and the other mom had to go back to an abusive family situation. And I mean, it was devastating. We were devastated to make that difficult choice, but it was also the prudent choice. And as a leader, you can't always lead with your heart. You have to lead with your mind, and you have to do what's prudent and best for your organization as a whole, not just for the case in front of you that is so heart wrenching. You grow as a leader to learn that you are actually responsible for your organization, and you let go of some things, like letting other people be responsible for those individual mamas. And so still, this was this heartbreaking decision. And I was in church that Sunday, and something that the pastor said, I didn't hear anything else he said, but I heard him say, if God's not going to give you more right now, what are you doing with what he's already given you? And I walked out of that service going, well, what has he already given us? And I brought our little team together that remained and said, what has he given us? Let's think through this. Like, what's going on, where we know we're getting more donations of stuff, like people are giving us donations of, things we need, less money. And our volunteer coordinator said, well, our volunteer hours have gone up by 30% because people don't have a job. And so they're volunteering more. And I'm like, okay, well, crazy idea. What if we asked volunteers to actually volunteer to be staff, like real live staff? Like, you have to come into the job without getting paid, as if you were a staff member. You have to come to staff meetings. You're going to get treated like a staff person. You'll have a job description just like a staff person. We all thought that it was, a crazy idea, probably would never work, but we put it out there to our church neighbors, and within probably a week, we had 3 volunteer staff members who were willing to work regular shifts, and we were able to take in that mama who we had to send back to an abusive home situation.
Oh, I've got goosebumps. That's an amazing story. And I think that is, it's so true, because leadership is so tough in that space, because we often do want to make those hard decisions because we want to do what feels good, but sometimes leadership doesn't always feel good, all those decisions that you have to make. And in my journey in particular, I had to let a couple of people go because of bad behavior. And that was very, very tough, because yes, they should go because they don't want to be part of the workplace culture. They don't want to be a contributing team member. So it was best for the organization for them to go. But it was tough. It was extremely tough, because that's a person that you're leaving without a job. And yeah, I think leadership by far is one of the toughest things. I mean, I'm a mum of three, so I think the two go hand in hand. I can't really say which one's toughest. Maybe motherhood's tougher than leadership. I think so. I think the thing about leadership that makes it slightly easier is that you're not related by blood to the people who you're working with. So yeah, because
True.
that can be definitely tough. Motherhood is leadership as well, right? Because we're leading our
Oh,
home.
so much.
Yep, we're leading our home, we're leading our family, and all the decisions that we make, we're a role model. We're a role model for them on a daily basis. So I wanted to touch on workplace culture. So with your staff and with everyone coming in and those volunteers, that was amazing, by the way, to get those 3 volunteers in. You never thought it would work, but God did a miracle. So that's amazing.
Right.
So how did you build up your workplace culture to what it is at the moment? Was there
Mhm.
certain practices that you put in with onboarding, or like really getting into those nitty-gritty operational things? Is there anything in particular there that stands out for you or that really works that you'd like to share with the listeners?
I think it was a journey of developing and defining and then kind of redefining what our core values are. And at this point in time, we have 4 core values. And at one point we had like 12. So you can have too many because that's a lot. We have 4 core values. And the first is Christ-centeredness. The second is relational excellence. The third is excellent environment. Um, oh my goodness, I'm going to miss the fourth one. Well, that's just embarrassing. I'll find it.
Don't
But
worry,
what I
that's
will
okay.
say, what I what I will say is it's extreme ownership. Gee. So
You got
we
it.
interview for those things. We ask these questions of we'll share that we're a faith-based organization, but that doesn't maybe necessarily mean anything. So we'll share examples of what that looks like for us. And then we'll ask, how does this value align for you? And so we're not asking directly, are you a Christian, which is against HR law, even though we are a faith-based organization, but we will say, here are our values, please, help us see how that aligns for you. And at this point in time, we've gotten fairly good at knowing when, just having listening for certain cues to make sure that someone really is aligned. The other thing we're looking for is, how do you really feel about teen moms and teen pregnancy? And if we ask that question and you say, something pretty judgmental, then you're probably not going to be a very good fit. It's totally okay if you say something that shows that you maybe just don't know or understand that world, but that you have a heart for them and for learning more. But if you just clearly are not aligned, then that's a good clue not to make that hire. And then one of the things that is super critical for us, and this is why excellent environment is one of our core values. Hope House is oftentimes the only safe place that our teenage moms have. They live in homes where there's a lot of chaos, a lot of disruption. They have people telling them all the time, you're never going to make it. You're going to be a statistic. They face a lot of shame in their own families, and in the community. And so if they come into Hope House and what they feel here is, or see, or witness or observe here is that people are gossiping, or they're catty with each other, or they are whispering in the corner, and there's like tensions that they can feel. That's how they live at home. They have to come here and see us be an example of how we relate with each other. And they're watching, like you can just watch them sort of looking at us, like they're watching when we answer the phone, when we joke with each other, when we tease each other in a loving way, when we answer the door. They're listening and looking for how we interact with one another, with volunteers, with other teen moms. Do we go into a private space when we're having to have a hard conversation with a mama and not have a hard conversation in front of others where it might be embarrassing to her? How do we handle their children if their children are running around sort of amok, and one of us is having to say, Mama, can I help you with giving you a minute so you can take a breath, and I'm happy to spend a little time with your little one for a few minutes. Like, how do we handle those things? And do they mostly watch us celebrate the wins versus punishing the negatives? Like, we're huge on celebration at Hope House. So I'm looking for opportunities to tell employees they're doing a really good job, because we're always looking for opportunities to tell our mamas that they're doing a really good job. And that's not just good job, mama. It's um I just noticed the way you talked with your little one as you were helping him get into his chair for dinner. And that was so encouraging, the way that you helped him with getting into his chair for dinner. So with employees, it might be, at the front desk. Blake, I just wanted to tell you that I have just loved the way you've greeted everybody today with a smile. It just makes my heart happy. And so we're constantly modeling for our moms through the way that we interact with our staff.
And that is very much the same when new employees start at a company, because it's those unwritten rules that when new employees
Mhm.
come in, they constantly checking how are the people in this organization dealing with each other? How do they answer the phone? How do they speak to their leader or the line manager? How do they deal with each other? Is there gossip at the water cooler? So it's definitely that same
Yes.
way where, the teen mums are looking at you guys. It's very much the same. That's what came to mind for me when you were talking about when new employees come. So we have to be so mindful when new employees come into our organization that we want that good workplace culture there all the time, not just because of the new employees. So yeah, that's I really like that example that you gave, because it's actually I'm smiling, but it's actually so amazing to me what a great correlation there is between a teenage mom and leadership. It's amazing. So I'm so glad to have you here for this chat today. So let's finish up our conversation. Why don't you, anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners? And then where can they contact you? Where can they learn more about Hope House?
I suppose, couple of things I say often is I feel like what I've learned is that leadership is sort of one long series of learning to let go. Because every time God gives me a little bit of his kingdom to be responsible for, and hopefully I try and do a good job of being responsible for that, and then he gives me a little more of his kingdom to be responsible for, I'm letting go of something in order to take hold of the next. So in the beginning, it was letting go of getting to work directly with the teenage moms every single day, which is why I did it in the first place. And then it's letting go of different parts of the organization to let someone else lead in that part of the organization. And sometimes even letting go of things that really give you great joy. So you have to figure out how you can have pieces of that joy in the next part of your journey. So for me, that means I have 2 or 3 teenage moms every year that I do speech coaching with, and they speak at our gala or our golf tournament. And those get to be my moms. Like, those are my moms I still get to have contact with. I take them shopping for their gala dress, and I take them out for lunch, and I build relationship with them and then maintain relationship throughout the year. So I'm still feeding my heart's desire to work directly with teen moms, but it's definitely not the main part of my job anymore. Um, so just that, I guess I would say, as maybe one word of advice would just be leaning on your faith and leaning into God, and knowing that when you are giving something up, it's because he's trusted you with something and you've done a good job with it. And so he's now calling you to the next kind of step. And you can rest in that you've done well. And that's why you're moving forward. And then in terms of where you can find Hope House, we're just in the beginning stages of national expansion in the United States. And you can learn more about that if you happen to be interested in opening a home for teen moms. You can find us on our website. You can also just learn more about what we do on our website, hopehousecolorado.org, O-R-G. And if you're interested in my book and just hearing some of the stories of just the crazy miracles God did to build Hope House, as well as a whole lot of humbling leadership journey, my book is available on Amazon, and it's called A Place to Belong.
Lovely. And thank you so much for being here. I really, really had such a good time talking with you about leadership and about teen moms. I was not a teen mom myself, but it's amazing that there are people like you out there who are supporting them, because I think it's a very, very important mission that you have. And if any of the listeners, if you resonated with that, or if you were a teen mom, or if you are interested in connecting with Lisa, please see her contact details in the show notes, because Lisa is a forerunner at this point in time for teen moms. And so if any of the listeners have got a story that they'd like to share as well, they can go on womenoffaithinleadership.com and share a voice note there about your journey as a leadership mom and how that has helped you in leadership as well. Well, thanks, Lisa, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, would you take 30 seconds and leave me a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts? It would mean so much to me to read your feedback. Also, it would really bless me big if you shared this episode with a fellow leader who might benefit from hearing today's message. And remember, put on the armor of God daily and walk by faith and not by sight. I'll meet you back on Monday for another episode.